I've realized how they can help with that holding of paradox. You're holding two pieces that belong together but are perfect mirrors of each other. And so this constant practice of, okay, I've got one piece and another piece, they are opposites and yet they somehow connect. And you do that over and over and over again. And with time, those individual paradoxes amount to a more beautiful reality. I tend to question everything and explore everything. I take play seriously, and so my philosophy of life is serious play. And I'm not sure we get to wisdom without play. So I'd rather go through the lens of Homo Ludens first. I think we can all play, and perhaps we all have the potential for Homo sapiens to be wise. But I think it's through the portal of play. Moments of that in and out exploration, that the navigating to a new base camp, the navigating around a base camp, and then ultimately coming back home. All of that is very much a process of destabilizing, purposeful, intentional destabilizing in the right amount, right? Not too much, that Goldilocks zone of destabilization, and then integrating that into a new perspective of self. And so kind of creating that experience of, oh, I had this assumption about the puzzle. I had the assumption that the world is flat, that there's only one true solution. And suddenly this object is reminding me that no, there are multiple paths, there are multiple ways. Even the puzzle itself is never going to be solved the same way twice. But if we naturally default into thinking that everything is simple, then we're almost automatically going to put ourselves into chaos. Ultimately, entropy is always pushing us towards the chaotic side unless we effortfully choose to navigate in the other direction. I feel fairly rooted, I guess would be the right word, grounded in this way of life, of this philosophy of life where care is important. And so if I can anchor myself in care, generally good things follow. I can't think of any community that would, it would be difficult for a community to hold together without at least one thing that they care about, like truly care about. And maybe that's the invitation, is every community is really an invitation to care about something.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Love and Philosophy. Today is about puzzles, puzzling. The very conversation that you are about to hear is a little bit of a puzzle. As Jasen Robillard, my guest, says, you know, when we have a conversation, we're sort of trying to fit our paths together through words in a very interesting way. And that is what this conversation is. One book that I am sending to you via PDF in a short, if you go to the YouTube channel or the Substack, is Homo Ludens, which is a book we talk about here by Johann Wenziger, which was published in German, I think in the 40s, maybe 1944. But I want to read you a quote from it. Here it goes. In play, there is something at play, which transcends the immediate needs of life and imparts meaning to the action. All play means something. If we call the active principle that makes up the essence of play instinct, we explain nothing. If we call it mind or will, we say too much. However we may regard it, the very fact that play has a meaning implies a non-materialistic quality in the nature of the thing itself. What do you think about that? If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, then you've heard me talk about play and puzzles with some really interesting people like C.T. Nguyen and Julian Kiverstein, and maybe even with Carl Friston, I'm not sure, but I've definitely brought this up quite a lot because I find it very interesting. I love this book, Homo Ludens, which means we are creatures that play, beings that play, instead of Homo sapiens. Although he does talk about mind there, and knowledge is part of play, so it's all wonderfully entangled, but this episode extends these themes with someone who's making puzzles, literally, but who also came to making puzzles in a very interesting way. He was an environmental engineer first, and then his life became a bit puzzling, and out of that came a whole new life making puzzles. I'm playing a bit here, but it is actually true, and you'll hear us talk about it. And Jasen is a listener. He's been listening from the beginning, I think, of the show, and he is someone who's just really supportive and wonderful and always introducing me to new things and new ideas that spark things for me. I'm really thankful for him. He sent me some of his puzzles, and they're gorgeous. If you're watching the YouTube, you will be able to see some of those, because I'm going to put up some photos, but if you're not, then I have put some links in the show notes, and you can look at them. But they're basically wooden, beautiful pieces of art, and a little overwhelming when you first see them because there are so many pieces and they're so beautiful and there's so many different shapes. We talk about that a bit here, about how there's this sort of sensory shock and then this wonderful sort of ecstasy that comes once you realize you can actually put them together, and then you get the beautiful result. But also just the way he thinks through it and the way he makes them, and the way some of the puzzles can even be placed together in different ways. So I like that. So it's relative to way making in a big sense, but also very much relative to love and philosophy, because there's a whole lot of care that goes into this, not only to the making of the puzzles, to the materials, but also, as you'll hear, Jason's really absorbing all sorts of conversations, artwork, ideas, books. He's very much alive and participating in trying to create something, what's the word? I guess beautiful and bold and real. Yeah, he's gone through his own trials and tribulations, as have all of us, and it's wonderful that he can sort of just speak about that to us here and share his experience. And I also want to share the puzzles with you. It's StumpCraft. So craft is already in the title too, and we do get around to talking about care and these things that he infuses into the puzzles, he and his team, but also into his work and his life, which are curiosity, creativity, integrity, and generosity. So that's a very interesting collection of words if you're thinking about care, if you're thinking about living, practicing philosophy every day and trying to figure out what the heck your philosophy is, because we all have them. But what is your philosophy? What do we care about? It's an interesting question to ask of yourself and also to ask of others when you're interacting. Where's the action coming from? What's the care? What's the tension between these systems of care that we're trying to negotiate, which is also what a conversation is. So in that sort of meta way, I want to introduce Jasen Robillard here to you, and he will tell you more about himself in just a few minutes. But I also want you to have a look at his puzzles. If you're interested in some practice and some ways of working with your body and not looking at screens, puzzles, games, books, going back to these wonderful objects that people create with care and love for you. And this is one of them. So thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. May you find and solve a wonderful puzzle this week. All right, here we go. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking that I think the two of us perhaps have a tendency to be self-effacing.
I don't fit into this, like, tell everyone all the amazing things you've done world. I think you don't either, because the more I looked at you, the more I was like, wow, wow, wow. But you don't tell me. And I guess that's what you mean, right?
Yeah. I'd rather people experience things than me have to tell them. And so if the objects or the essays that I'm writing aren't moving people, then I'm doing it wrong, and I shouldn't have to spend more time explaining the thing that I'm doing. Yeah.
Can you tell me how to say your name correctly?
Yeah. Jasen is just Jasen. My mom is Francophone, and so she spelt it phonetically as she thought it was spelt.
That's awesome.
And so that's why the E is there instead of the O. And then my dad only speaks English, even though we have a French last name. So my dad's side would pronounce it Robillard, Robillard, and my French side of the family would pronounce it Robillard.
Okay. How do you pronounce it normally in everyday life?
I typically do the two combined, so I say Robillard instead of Robillard.
Robillard. Robillard? All right. Well, yeah. Jasen, I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so happy to meet you in person. And there's a million things I want to talk about with you, but I'm kind of want to just jump in the deep end in a way. I'm always talking about holding paradox and beyond either or and this kind of thing. So if we can, I would like to ask you what puzzles bring to that, how puzzles can help us with that idea of holding paradox. I know you talk about it some in your writings and things, but I would really like to start there if it's okay with you.
Sure. I think I've come to this realization slowly. So I got into puzzles kind of through my love of board games back in the early 2010s. Experienced my first wooden puzzle back in those early 2010s. Wasn't designing my own puzzles. But back in 2016, I had a bit of a career change and decided to, through necessity, reinvent what it is that I do. Um, and I think through playing with puzzles and designing puzzles, I've realized how they can help with that holding of paradox, just in the fact that you're holding two pieces that belong together but are perfect mirrors of each other. And so this constant practice of, okay, I've got one piece and another piece, they are opposites and yet they somehow connect. And you do that over and over and over again. And with time, those individual paradoxes amount to um, a more beautiful reality.
Maybe for people who don't know these amazing puzzles, which I've played that you make, they're so beautiful. First of all, you're sort of an artist and a puzzle maker, right? That's fair to say.
Yeah, I'm getting used to that term. I don't like affixing that label to myself. If other people do it, then that's I'm okay with that. But to have such a grandiose title bestowed upon me by myself is not something I'm keen.
Yeah. We were talking about we're both a bit too self-effacing according to others in our lives. So let's just say you're an artist and a puzzle maker among many other things for now.
Yes.
But these puzzles are beautiful, which is why I bring up the art, because they're basically art objects and not, I mean, they're very special even if they were art. They're unique looking. But can you help people get a visual of it? I can put up some visuals too for the people watching it on video, but the audio, how do people imagine what you're building, what you're making with the puzzles?
Yeah. So maybe we start with what people immediately jump to in terms of in their the image in their mind of what a puzzle is. So the typical puzzle nowadays is a fairly flat, um, we'll call it piece of art. Typically, it's more illustrative. Um, that puzzle is made of cardboard. It is very rectilinear in terms of its approach. So it's very grid based, almost repetitive in terms of the nature of the piece design. What I've done is I've kind of taken that puzzle and taken it apart and layered aspects of puzzle design in it. So first, I start with an actual um, piece of fine art. All of our art is Canadian art, and then what I do is I layer on an interpretive lens on that art and imbue the puzzle with symbolic elements that reinforce the meaning behind the art. And so rather than a rectilinear and grid-like cut for the pieces, I'm organically drawing individual pieces and and so the pieces are very funky, they're very unique. Um, because I'm designing and drawing every one of the lines, every piece is a unique piece itself. So there's, unless I'm deliberately adding repetition into the design, every piece is its own unique, beautiful sculptured piece of art.
It definitely is. When I first opened it, I was a little overwhelmed because each piece looks like a beautiful little sculpted wooden art object. And then it's kind of like, how in the world am I ever going to put these together? But that's exactly that feeling I think that you're describing about holding these two things that actually you have all these things and you know somehow two of them are opposite in the way that's going to create something that that's going to make sense. Um, and it's a little overwhelming, and then it's so wonderful to move through that feeling of overwhelm. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's probably the biggest um that first opening of the box, the dumping of the pieces onto the table, that's that first really significant hurdle that people have to sit in, right? It's kind of like
Absolutely.
a no mud, no lotus, right? So you have to kind of pass through that feeling of discomfort. Sometimes it can take days of just kind of leaving the messy pile of pieces on the table, and then one day you might just walk by the table and suddenly it's like, oh, that piece and that piece, they go together,
Yeah.
and then that kind of gives you that taste of oh, I can actually make something beautiful out of a chaotic pile of pieces.
They call to you too because they want to be touched. Did you do that on purpose? They're I think one thing I love about all of this, and I'm a little excited about it, is that, you know, I've been this year I want to think more about practices of embodied, being and in our bodies and holding paradox. And this has all of that because I don't know if you all thought of it when you're creating it, but it's a real tactile, embodied action in the way you're describing too, that it's not just this flat thing. You talk about escaping Flatland, and this is almost like literal. Did you really think about that when you were starting to make these?
It's evolved. I think maybe um, having done these puzzles before and not designed them, I had a visceral reaction to them that was positive, but I couldn't necessarily explain it. But in getting into the design and trying to make them better, I've kind of discovered what makes puzzles attractive and resonant. And so I've been getting more and more into that. Certainly, the thickness of the pieces. There's our pieces are laser cut wood, and so there's a olfactory. There's a sense of smell attached to them too. That doesn't necessarily help with the solving of the puzzle, but somehow it adds to the experience because it is a more embodied experience. The sense of smell often is tied to memory, and so that
Hmm.
that memory aspect also gets pulled in. So you've got the sense of smell, the sense of touch. Um, just about the only thing that isn't involved is a sense of taste. There is still that experience taste that's there, and because it's the sense of movement too, I think is important in that embodied practical
Hmm.
sense of
And the color, it's like very
the color
colorful.
too. Yeah.
And well, you said that you came upon this or started doing this at a juncture in your life or something like that. Can we talk about that a little bit about how puzzles, because this what we've been talking about already feels like what happens when we come to junctures at our lives, and it's interesting that you very literally started to work with puzzles as you're working out a puzzle. It sounds like in your life. Can you tell me a little bit about that time or how this relates in some way?
Yeah. I think we often try to pinpoint moments in time, but my moments tend to stretch over months and years. So I've had a fairly eclectic career. I live in Calgary, Alberta, so lots of oil and gas. That's kind of the bread and butter of the industry here. I was an environmental engineering consultant, so did a lot of work on environmental cleanups, that type of thing. It's a very cutthroat industry. No one wants to pay for that work. There's still quite a few people who do it, so it's not the most glorious income or the most glorious work. Anyways, that arc of my career kind of ended. Um, Two kids split work between my wife and I while we were child rearing. Um, and got into co-housing development. So I did quite a bit of group facilitation work around group process and organizational design. Um, and that work also kind of went off a cliff around 2015, 2016. Um, and one of the projects I was working on, it was my own co-housing development here in Calgary, and that project kind of came to a bitter end. And so there are a number of things that really all ended roughly in the same time period between 2013 and I'd say 2016 or so. And that's what spurred on this new identity, I guess, in terms of exploring art, exploring a bit of embodied philosophy. Um, and yeah, so part of that all of those projects coming to an end was a bit of a yeah, I think in a way forced me to grieve, I think, to a certain degree, the past. and to emerge with a different approach. And so that in itself is a bit of a going through the threshold of paradox, of being one thing at one point and then somehow blending in with some other identity in the future. Spending more time at home. I was able to do this at home in my workshop. So a lot of solitary work. I can do art and listen to podcasts. I can do art and listen to audiobooks on philosophy. I can listen to plenty of YouTube conversations with my favorite philosophers. And so all that kind of got imbued into the practice of doing art and solving puzzles. And so that's how, that's the messiness of how I transitioned from old Jasen to this more current version of Jasen.
Right, which is, of course, not one moment or thing, but had you already been reading philosophy, and were you already interested in puzzles? And also in there, I don't know, I was thinking about, as you were talking, this sort of puzzle of who we are, that we're always trying to, someone asks you, who are you? And you have to put together this little puzzle of who you are. And when our identities change in the way you were discussing, personal and work related and so forth, that can be very puzzling. I mean, so I just wonder, I just want to put that there. And also the philosophy. I know a lot of my turn towards philosophy has been towards trying to hold that space of identity, not even only for myself, but for, the way I see the world and things like that. But I wonder if any of that resonates, or just how the philosophy and the puzzling kind of were in your life over time.
Prior to 2016, probably not at the forefront of I wasn't really paying attention to that. Probably started doing more formal meditation around that time, 2012, 2013. And I think that was kind of the slow on-ramp to more serious consideration and intention. I do remember having conversations with friends while I was kind of in the early stages of puzzle design, and we would have these philosophical conversations. I'm not sure they were debates really, but just more explorations. And one conversation I do recall was that we were making bold statements about the world, and my bold statement was that this is a world of paradox, and that is a tough thing to hold, but is true nevertheless, whether we want it to be so or not.
Do you remember what you were feeling when you said that? Was it experiential, kind of, or just came to you?
I think it came to me. I don't really recall if I'd been thinking about this for some time, but it seemed like just a natural conclusion. I've always had a bit of a philosophical slant, um, so I tend to question everything and explore everything. I take play seriously, and so my philosophy of life is serious play. Um, uh, I consider myself as Homo Ludens as opposed to Homo sapiens, but hadn't read Homo Ludens until about a couple of years ago.
Oh, wow.
And so that book certainly resonates with that belief in who I am, anyways.
Yeah, I love that book. Maybe I'll just do a little summary of it earlier on, or in the intro, so people can know what it is. But what do you want to say anything about that book specifically? What's the difference between those two kinds of beings?
Well, I think Homo sapiens infers that we are all wise, and I'm not sure we get to wisdom without play. So I'd rather go through the lens of Homo ludens first. I think we can all play, um, and perhaps we all have the potential for Homo sapiens to be wise, but I think it's through the portal of play.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have to have a somewhat safe-ish space to be able to do that. Or do you? What do you think?
Absolutely, yeah. It's difficult to play when it's not safe. I mean, there are certain people you can put yourself in situations where it isn't safe, and that can be playful. But ultimately, I think even that arena ultimately has to hold certain rules in order for you to 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 truly get the most out of that experience.
Yeah, there's a lot of tension I feel in this. I mean, I love that book too, and the idea of play and so on. But um, these times in our life where things are changing, um, I can imagine like the meditation can kind of help you maybe open the space in a certain different way to be able to sit with it or something. And play feels really different from that, but I don't really see them as different. So I don't know. I just kind of want to bring that up because it's also making me think about something I realize we have in common, which is that we moved a lot, I think, as kids. And that this notion of what it is to be safe or at home is important, I think, for you too,
Mhm.
even though you also seem to have had a lot of shifting about what home was. So I don't know why. I'm just those things are coming up for me a little bit. But do you is that true? Did you move a lot when you were a kid? Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We seem to move every 4 years. My sense is that um, this largely was driven by my mom's desire for safety, for finding that perfect home and never quite finding it, and always kind of being driven to find that next best place. So we moved from um, kind of the family farm, where my dad's family farm. There was a whole bunch of brothers that lived on the same rural road. Um, and so we'd have lots of family gatherings there. Um, there was a bit of a family um, tussle, I would say, with respect to who got to say what about each other's lives, and I think as a result of that, we ended up moving to a more rural location where we moved from one rural location to another small village of about 400 people. That caused a lot of or generated a lot of potential for exploration because I would spend hours at a time going biking and exploring the rural countryside. Um, that created changes in schooling. My mom was a teacher, so at one point we were in that small village. The quality of teaching was not to my mom's liking. We were in split grades, so I was in third and fourth grade in the same class, and then she took me out of that, or she took my sister and I out of that very rural small school setting into this school where she was teaching, which is about another rural town about an hour away. So a lot of travel there, a lot of reading, a lot of reading happened on that commute. Um, then high school was uh, another transition. Moved to a school that focused on arts and enrichment of education through the arts. That was another hour commute away from our small town. And then eventually I went from that high school and distanced myself even further from my hometown by going to the University of Waterloo, which was a 5-hour drive away from where my hometown is.
So in all those moves, did you notice this is something I noticed when I moved that every place is a little bit of a different configuration that you sort of have to figure out how, what's cool in one place, I mean, to be really general, might not be in the other, or, in the smaller town, it's different than in the bigger city in a way that you have to see how it's almost like you're looking at the pieces in a new way or something. Did you experience that when you were moving? Because for me, that was a very formative kind of habituation to to life. But I don't know if you also understand what I'm saying there.
Yeah, I totally understand. I'm not sure if I notice that impact on me, like that habituation impact at the time, but looking back on it, absolutely. Um, um, yeah, just kind of spiraling out further and further from the safety of home. Um, and I think also in that gradual spiral out of the safety of the environment, also building up the safety of self. Like the, when you're traveling, when you're moving to a new place, the thing that is constant is you. Um, and I think if you are somewhat stable, right? Nothing I think is truly stable. I don't think you want to be fully in stasis. Um, but if you can carry that safety with you, right? If you can build that safe perception of self, you can I think experience play in almost any setting.
Yeah, that's when I was reading some of what you write about why we should play games, and maybe we can get into some of, I think I wrote down some of the interesting things you bring up, like theories and things and ideas relative to that. But first, this more personal stuff, because you also wrote about the different base camps. Um, I'm not sure I remember it, but is it kind of what you were just saying? It like where you talk about you always find your way back home. Like when you were a kid, you're out exploring, but you always could find your way back home, even if you got, went a little too far, you didn't quite know where you are. And there was this exploration sort of side or tension or movement in a way. And then there's this relocation movement that we're talking about where it's a little more disruptive or this kind of bigger puzzling of putting the things back together and finding your center again and wanting to be exploring the edges so much, even though you're in a new space, so you're creating new edges. But is that making sense at all? Can you talk about that base camp and those two different ways that you've thought about that?
Yeah, I think the article I wrote about that on Substack was the in and outs of navigating complexity essentially. Um, and it kind of relates to how we go camping quite a bit. We do a lot of we've got an amazing backyard in terms of the great outdoors here where we live. We've got the mountains just about an hour away from here in Calgary, and so we're often heading out into the mountains on weekends. And so when we do that, we change our base camp. We go from our home base camp where we've got bedrooms and a kitchen and a bathroom and a shower and then we set up a new base camp out in the wild temporarily, so we know we can always come back home and where we have all the amenities of the modern era. But out there, we're living in, I'd say, thriving and flourishing with a lot less. And so that base camp is our new base camp for 2, 3, 5 days. Um, and then from that base camp, we then go out and explore the surrounding area. And so we'll go on hikes. We'll walk along the riverbed. We'll climb to the peak of a mountain and look down, and all of that gives us a lot of perspective, um, both in terms of our life there in the mountains in the short term, but also I think there are lessons that I certainly get from going out into the wild and bringing those lessons back home to quote unquote civilization.
Ah.
Moments of that in and out exploration, that the navigating to a new base camp, the navigating around a base camp, and then ultimately coming back home. All of that is very much a process of uh, destabilizing, purposeful, intentional, destabilizing in the right amount, right? Not too much, that Goldilocks zone of destabilization, and then integrating that into a new perspective of self and world.
Yeah, I think I often thought about edge work or these, going to places where you're a little bit uncomfortable, which I guess relates to that. And I believe you talk about it as a kind of finding balance between almost as if it's two poles.
Yeah, I do. Um, I use polarity management a lot. So I do put values in opposition just to see where the balance is. So I kind of treat every pole kind of like a bit of a recipe
Hmm.
that
Like
that
a recipe? Each pole like a recipe?
Yeah, so
Oh, that's fascinating.
like I'm like I'm cooking a delicious meal, and so I'm trying to figure out what, how much spice of, how much spice do I want to add to this meal? What's the appropriate amount of spice given the contextual setting? So having you over for dinner, how much spice do you like? Well, I like a lot of spice, but you might not. So, between the two of us, there's a polarity there in terms of how spicy we like our food. And obviously, if I want to be a good host and yet still please me, there's a middle ground between the two of us that we have to navigate together.
So you're saying the recipe is how you deal with the tension between the poles, not the pole itself? Is that
That's right.
more? Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm thinking about attention because when we play puzzles, there's this quality of attention, which maybe relates to the meditation a bit, but also to when you're in not dangerous, but a situation that's not normal for you when you're at the edges in this kind of safe, playful way that we're talking about. There's a different kind of attention. I'm wondering how that fits with the recipeing or the way that you put things in polls, because what I'm also trying to get at is that you do talk about balance, but I almost want to push this even further because I feel like that's part of the puzzle too. You have so many pieces, not just the two opposite. So I want to get to that a bit too. But first, just attention maybe in relation to this.
Yeah, and what sparks for me is this escaping flatland metaphor, right? So one level up from flatland is dealing with a single polarity. But I personally see polarities more as kind of a star, right? Everything kind of intersects, but it's very difficult for us. Well, or maybe it's difficult for me. I'll speak for me. It's difficult to handle more than one polarity at once, even realizing that there are more than one polarity acting on an environment at any one time.
Absolutely. I'm always trying to think of it as in constellations or stars, and it is really hard to
Exactly.
visualize or much less talk about. But just how every point is obviously going to be in a lot of different seemingly polar relationships if you can zoom out and sort of look at that. And then even that becomes fractal, but
Yes.
I don't want to get too far out with that, but that reminds me of something you do talk about that's helped you. It's like a 2D, 3D. Does that relate to this escaping flatland too? 2D, 3D mindset, but I don't really remember what it was with Marlowe, I think, or how to kind of not get stuck in those blind spots that can come when we think there's only the polarity.
Right. Yeah. So the 2D aspect is for me that flattening down to, especially flattening down to a single polarity, and then taking that single polarity and then saying that one pole is best. That's I think that's the 2D mindset. Up from there is recognizing that there is no single pole that is best, that things are always in tension. And I think the next level, maybe 4D, is the fact that there are multiple polarities acting upon us at any one time. And so being open to recognizing that it's not just one pole, it's not just one polarity, it's multiple polarities in a very complex system. If you can get beyond holding that level of paradox, then you're beyond me.
But do you think playing puzzles or these practices of puzzling that, this becomes a way of kind of being in the world too, but even just the very simple act of playing puzzles too and cultivating a kind of attention, is there any relation there to being able to maybe start to notice what you've just been saying? I mean, do you see any connection there, even in just your own life, in the way that something like this has, even what we were talking about with the base camps, that's a kind of, action, puzzles in action. Does that do something in terms of the way it changes your relationship to these tensions that seem so dipolar?
I think so. That's my hope. I design these puzzles to bring a bit of that spark, that opening to think about paradox, about polarities. I'm often putting symbolic pieces in the puzzle, or I'm also trying to look at ways of embodying cognitive biases into the puzzle so that they are visible and felt and can be recognized. As an example, most puzzles will have a single solution, and so we will approach it. If a puzzle is placed on the table, our immediate assumption is that there's one and only one solution. Um, and I deliberately shake that assumption. Um, I don't. It's not necessary for people to see it, but I want the potential to be there. And so in some of my puzzles, I'll have pieces that go in multiple spots, um, um, and spots that are meaningful. So there's clearly a solution where all the pieces all fit together in one cohesive whole, where the reference image is replicated in the puzzle solution. But then there's also the potential of taking pieces out as if they were um, uh, my artist palette, right? So taking pieces as if they were uh, colors on a palette and then reassembling them into a completely different configuration. That is also beautiful. That is also clearly intentional. These things don't happen by accident, and so kind of creating that experience of, oh, I had this assumption about the puzzle. I had the assumption that the world is flat, that there's only one true solution, and suddenly this object is reminding me that no, there are multiple paths, there are multiple ways. Even the puzzle itself is never going to be solved the same way twice. You add in another person, right? You solve the puzzle solo, you solve it with another person. That experience is completely different. It will have a different navigational line to follow. Um, and I think in maybe going back to memory, in re-experiencing a puzzle a second time, um, maybe with a slightly different context, also feeds into that in-out base camp approach, right? You come back to a base camp that you remember well, and suddenly it takes on a whole new life in the new context of who's in the room. Even you as a person have changed over the course of time since the last time you did it. Um, that's a lot. I'll let you
I love
let you
that. You
bounce
can
back.
keep going and going. That's just wonderful. I just love it so much that the same pieces can actually be put together in different ways. And even when you put them together in the same way at a different point or time, they're coming together differently and they mean something differently and they might look different. And how that's also the way we explore literal geographical landscapes, but also you talk about conversation a lot. And I think that's an interesting thing to bring up here too, is that as you were talking, it sounds, we can have a conversation in a way with the puzzle. And then also there's, wider nested notions of community that come in too. Is that an important thing, this conversational aspect for you?
Absolutely, yeah. I this kind of comes back, I think, maybe to the self-effacing or um, I very much prefer one-on-one conversations. I find that if I'm in a group beyond four or five, I think I would classify myself as a highly sensitive person, and so when I'm in those rooms beyond when when a room is holding more than one conversation, I find that quite difficult, and so I tend to erase myself from those situations, either by leaving the room or simply just dropping out. Uh, and the puzzles are very much that attempt to have one-on-one conversations with as many people as I can without me being there. Even though I would love to have conversations with everyone that is engaging with a puzzle of mine. And so I try to have these layered hooks, these fractal levels of meaning that people can engage with wherever they happen to be in their life. And so if they're at the point where they're experiencing life in a 2D flat perspective, they can engage with that just by opening the box, thinking it's a puzzle, and then suddenly being perhaps awakened to the fact that there is maybe a little bit more relief and and grip within a 3D mindset. If people are already there, then I layer in blogs and deep dives in terms of what went into the interpretation of the art and what is layered into the design. I'll include musical playlists that are at the background of my design process as well. And so these are all little hooks that people can engage with in a conversational mode um, at their discretion.
So there's even audio. We were talking before about all the different embodied sensory aspects of all of this. And yeah, music also comes in. I hadn't thought of that, or how that can be incorporated too into the puzzles. What I love about what you just said, first of all, I really resonate and identify. I think a lot of us and a lot of people listening to this will about how there's something about being with someone one-on-one, even not, it doesn't even have to be a living person. I mean, it's wonderful. Of course, that's the way we want living, even books, right? When we're reading philosophy books, or we're engaging in these conversations, which are also kind of similar to the puzzle in this conversation, a reflective conversational way. You can be with materials in a sense, or it can be through with another human through those materials, which is almost always the case, even if it's not thought of in that way. I really feel that. And you said you want to have as many conversations as you can with people, even when you're not there with them. I feel like that's something almost all of us want in different ways, especially people who want to create or feel like they want to find ways to express things in that more intimate sense because of the overwhelm that comes in trying to be in the world in that very social big way. I'm trying to think about the communication and the community part of it, because so you and I seem to be similar in that we like the more intimate and the one-on-one. And yet I think I definitely feel in your work that you have, you want human flourishing. I mean, just to put it a little bit too grandiose, but
Yeah.
there's something about, I'm asking you, is there something about what you're doing and why you're drawn to puzzles and why you're doing this that actually sees transformation on a bigger scale as connected to that more intimate space that you just described?
Yeah. Maybe this comes back to how this conversation is a bit of a puzzle, right? Like you're bringing materials into this context. I'm bringing materials, and somehow between the two of us, we're trying to find the pieces that connect well, right? So this conversation is a bit of a social puzzle. I think any context where multiple people come together is essentially one of those puzzles that we're trying to figure out together. The exploration of preferences, the exploration of our boundaries. What can we bring into a social context that's shared? I don't know how much of this is true, but I have an intuition that puzzles really went through a big boom um, around the time of the First World War, right? So in times of high conflict, high political tensions, high liminality, which is very distressing generally. But that's when there was a massive boom in puzzles, at least in the U.S. And I suspect it was probably more of a worldwide thing as well. And I think we're seeing this return to puzzles naturally emerge at this time. There seems to be um, a bit of a cycle or a pattern in terms of us having to deal with more chaotic environments, and what tools allow us to um, to be okay with periods of destabilization. I see the puzzles as a way of entering into that liminal state, and puzzles are one of those experiences that do cross generations. It's one of the few activities that a 5-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 50-year-old, and an 80-year-old can all participate in the activity at the same time. It is a bit of a conversational sparker. Certainly, it's a observational sparker, right? The 90-year-old can observe that the 5-year-old is able to do this miraculous thing. It is really quite eye-opening. I have adult, um, well, I have adults who approach our booth at Christmas markets and that type of thing, who immediately bounce off of the the offering, saying that they can't possibly do this puzzle. It's too complicated. The pieces are too small. I don't have the patience for this. This is not for me. And yet, a 5-year-old who is, you know, perhaps more on the beginner's mind side of things, isn't hasn't been told that this is not for them. They're much more inclined to pick up a piece, maybe put it in their mouth, and see what it's made of and what it's for. Um, and and so these 5 and 6 and 8-year-olds are doing very complex manipulation of objects that adults somehow have decided that they can't do. So there's an interesting conversational aspect to that I think is I don't know, just tantalizing in terms of bringing to the fore. And I like this aspect of bringing generations together in terms of sense making. And so that's, I think, the community aspect of this, where I think there's small interactions that are done through the act of puzzling that then can reverberate in the larger community sense making space.
There's so many things in there that I love. The liminality, that those kinds of times make us, or that those kind of times historically become times we want more puzzles. That's incredibly interesting idea, that we can't really make sense of everything that's going on. Would that be more of a relocation kind of happening, that we've gotten into a new place? So somehow when we can focus on an embodied action like a puzzle, it's more pleasing? Because I've honestly thought about how I think puzzles feel incredibly attractive right now in a way that's different than they would have 5 years ago. And that's very strange, but I think it probably does have to do with that, what you're saying there, that liminality, and then connecting that with the different generations. That the liminality itself seems to be somehow what's a process that is holding all of us in a sense too. I mean, I'm going kind of far out here, but does that bring anything up for you at all? Or even could you say more about this historical pattern?
Yeah, so I'm certainly not a historian, so this is just an observation I made that seems to it has some stickiness to it. Like it
Yeah.
just seems like there's something to that. Certainly, um, I've noticed the word puzzling coming up over and over again. That metaphor of the puzzles is seems to be very emergent and resonant right now. It might just be that I'm in the puzzle world, so um, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the yellow bus issue. I'll just explain this briefly. So when our kids were younger, you know, kind of elementary school, primary school age, probably in the 6 to 10 year old, one of the games that they somehow picked up was pointing out yellow cars. So you can get a point for pointing out a yellow car. They're fairly rare, and you get negative points if you're pointing out a yellow taxi. So it's very specific things. A yellow bike might be 2 points. A yellow boat would be 3 points. The rarer the yellow object vehicle, the better. But yellow buses are also very prominent. Yellow taxis, those are things to avoid. So in practicing this game, especially while you're driving, and the kids are out there and they're not driving, they can point out the objects, and suddenly you want to compete in this arena of pointing out the yellow objects, and the quality of your driving deteriorates because you're no longer paying attention to road signs and vehicles around you. You're only looking for these not yellow buses. So in the same way, because I'm focused on the word puzzle, am I picking up on that signal in a biased way? Possibly. But it does seem like that word is more and more prevalent in our cultural use of late.
Yeah, your story reminds me of the punch bug kind of thing that we always play.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is similar. And sometimes you
Yeah.
can figure out a color, but no, I think I'm sure you notice puzzles more than most people do, but I do think there's something to what you said about you brought up making sense or sense making, and that's something I thought about a lot, thinking about puzzles and looking at your work and stuff, because there is a way in which, like I said at the beginning, in a sense, like you open this thing and it seems overwhelming, and then you begin to make sense of it, and there's something about on that it's not a small level, but that immediate level of almost a representational way of doing that that does make you feel that it's possible in bigger ways in life. So I can't imagine that when we're in times where things seem to be changing, or whatever we thought was foundational, or whatever we thought of as home base, the base camp, whatever is, we're not there, or it's changing, we're relocating, that these kinds of games and puzzles where we can play when we're in a safe enough space would actually be, patterning our learning process, maybe in a way like a Bateson kind of way that I think you also think about a lot, like learning to learn in a different way, that we can still make sense of the world. It feels like games can be so important in that way, and meaningful, just in teaching us our embodied existence, that we can make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what I find with the puzzles is that they're imbued with value, but they're also imbued in this kind of developmental learning capacity. So from a sense making and maybe an escaping Flatland perspective, if we combine those two, there's are you familiar with the OODA loop, the
Yes.
observe, orient, decide, act? So every one of those pieces is an embedded OODA loop, and that OODA loop is inviting people to recognize that despite the fact that we want simple, flat, that things are actually generally at least complicated, if not complex, and certain situations are definitely chaotic. But we always want to kind of flatten things down to the most simple thing because that provides us the most grip on a situation. But if we naturally default into thinking that everything is simple, then we're almost automatically going to put ourselves into chaos. And so the puzzles and are that reminder that there is chaos, but by approaching it in the right way with an OODA loop mindset, we can navigate towards better environments where things might be um, complex. Or if we're wanting something complicated, we can trim down on the chaos and make it complicated. And if we further want to trim down on the chaos, then we can make it simple. But ultimately, entropy is always pushing us towards the chaotic side unless we effortfully choose to navigate in the other direction.
In that way, the entropy is almost generative, because we can use it to do that, to take the initiative, to find ways to, navigate this terrain differently. Which also makes me think about critical thinking and just, philosophy itself and reading, and how that's also doing a similar patterning as puzzling might do, in just showing us possibilities of ways we can shift perspective and find new associations and new paths in the way that you brought up earlier.
Yeah, it's for me, it's a bit of the shaking of the snow globe, right? So I think it's Robin Carhart Harris who's done some research in terms of um, either psychedelic experiences or experiences that kind of provide that introduction of white noise or chaos into an environment can be unsettling, but it allows for that the fresh snow to cover the tracks, the paths that we've navigated through
Mhm.
consistently. But that fresh snow allows us to see the landscape in a new way, and so we can approach that terrain differently a second time.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought of it with psychedelics, because that kind of experience is often, expressed through something visually that looks like a puzzle or a fractal, or pieces that go together differently. Is Are you aware of any connections or people writing about that at all?
I'm not.
Yeah,
No.
it's just interesting. I hadn't really thought about it, but there's a connection there for sure in that. There's still a lot of things I had to talk about, but like, is there anything coming up for you that we should explore a little bit? Anything that you would really like to kind of share with people that I should bring up or that you had on your mind or?
Um, my own curiosity is with respect to your experience of the puzzles, and as someone who is attempting to design the puzzles to make them engaging no matter where we are on the escaping flatland mountaintop. I'm just curious about how you engaged with the puzzles. Did you do it with your partner? Was I'm just curious about that and how that might impact my design perspective.
I'd actually like to learn more about how you design it too, but well, I'll tell you, and maybe this brings us to kind of community and home and love and these kinds of
Yeah.
things because those are important, I think, for all of this. Like we've been talking about it in a philosophical way, but it's also play and it's also a reason to connect. So you sent me the things to my home in the US. So it came at a time where I was seeing a lot of family and with a lot of family. So my niece or my brothers and all these people. So for me it was an interesting way to connect with them or share it with them because I couldn't bring everything here. So I wanted to share it with them and let them experience it. And I already described the embodied connection of it and what I love about that was the first major impression for me was that I felt the puzzles feel like they're going to become part of your environment in a different way than a traditional puzzle or a game. And I like that a lot. They even come in this nice little box and everything about it is very sensory or sensual even. And over time it even makes it more important for me. But I do think probably the strongest kind of thing I would share with you is that it gives you a reason to share it with other people and to that is ongoing, you know. So I mean, partly not everyone is going to be living in different places and but this is a conversation, right, that you started. They will sort of do it while I'm away or I will go and I will try and so on. And just even the fact that I could sort of have this kind of gift that's ongoing feels very important to me about that. I think that relates to notions of community and you talk about home a lot, that you could always find your way home. And as someone who's moved a lot and is still working all over the world and with my partner, my husband is my whole family, we're all over the place. So I think that home, that sense of home as shared puzzles in a metaphorical way, but also as shared play and safety in the way that we've brought up is implicit in what I've received from your gifts of the puzzles, but also just in what I've come to think of as why those might feel so important to a lot of people right now and what they give us, and why play is much more than just frivolous activity. I know that's a lot, but that's what comes just kind of. I don't know
Yes,
if
for
that sounds like anything you've heard before or.
well, probably not as well expressed, but it definitely connects to, I guess what the embedded value of the puzzles are certainly what I'm intending to put into the design. It's definitely care. Um, we have maybe I'll just speak to the values that are embedded within the puzzles. Um, the four values that I aspire to imbuing within the puzzles are to start with a spirit of curiosity. So that kind of relates to the folks who come to our our puzzles and kind of push back, that are somehow repelled. They just lack that aspect of curiosity, and so if there's no curiosity, it's a door closed. And so just opening up the box itself is an invitation to curiosity. Um, then the next value that we try to espouse is creativity. And so in order to put this puzzle together, you really have to be somewhat creative and open to creativity, and that's, I think, that aspect of play that comes in. Um, Integrity is the third value that we have, and that's how things hold together. right? So that aspect of bringing things together, the center must hold, um, doing things the right way, even though they're hard, right? So our puzzles are hard, um, and so you are facing that challenge with every puzzle that you do of ours. There's no escaping hard. There's just like there's no escaping entropy, and then that last aspect with respect to care is generosity. So I love using our puzzles as gifts. I think they're that conversational gift that keeps emerging, right? So it's not a single occurrence. It's one of those emergent occurrences that can happen over a long period of time, and all of it is meant in a spirit of generosity and care. So yeah, and definitely an aspect of trying to get communities to flourish together.
Well, I think you can be, what's the word? I don't know, proud in a way, because that's pretty much what I expressed, right? Those things. That's what it brought. So isn't that amazing that you can make something and put it in the world and those sorts of experiences can happen? I think that's just amazing in a way.
Just like this conversation.
Like
It's amazing
conversations
that this
and
conversation
books,
can
and
happen.
isn't it amazing what we can do with one another? I mean, I just sometimes I'm really amazed. Like I look around at all these books and I think, okay, these are just like little boxes of words, and some of them have completely changed my life. And I'm sure you know what I mean too. Just opening you to completely new worlds. I don't know. There's something about thinking of the world through that lens that also feels really connected to what you just said and the intention in making the puzzle, and maybe a healthy kind of turn that we could take if we were engaging in more puzzle solving together on that kind of a level, a playful level. Right now, all the puzzles feel so huge and overwhelming, right? The experts are supposed to solve them, and maybe they never will in time. And I don't know, maybe there is something about starting to do puzzles together in these ways, with beautiful objects, with embodied stuff, going through the difficulty, sitting with the difficulty and the entropy. Maybe that is a really beautiful practice to help with those other ones that we also have to deal with.
Yeah. Hopefully it's one piece of that problem solving puzzle.
And it's also fun.
Yeah.
When you make them, I mean, when you first started making them, were you literally just in your garage making them with like a wood make, what do you even call those things?
I
Or
was
how to
hand drawing the designs. There's a few local maker spaces that had laser cutters, and so I prototyped at those maker spaces, and then eventually got my own laser engraver and started prototyping myself, and then the rest is history.
Well, it seems like there's a whole community of. Is there a community that you go and talk at like puzzle conferences and things, right?
Well, I've done that once,
Okay,
but yes,
but
and
they
it's amazing
exist.
the
There are.
number of small communities that are out there. I was speaking with a friend yesterday about this small group of people who are uh, discovering bread clips. The clips on bread bags. Apparently, there's I think hundreds of species of bread clips, and there's a
Wow.
community that is playfully exploring that uh, taxonomy. So there's a community out there for any subject. And typically those communities are um, quite caring, I think, in the end.
Yes, I think that word care is very important. And if any of when we're looking to, I think we all have something to care for, a life to care for. And it can also be, this kind of care, making a puzzle or playing a puzzle can be a way to start, or finding that weird thing. Maybe it's bread clips or whatever it is that you think is so fascinating. You can probably, like, as you just expressed, find other people who also think that. And it's how nice to connect in those sorts of ways. I think it's something that's not often given as an alternative to people. They don't even think about that they could do that, and it opens up whole worlds, which I'm sure puzzles there's probably all kinds of interesting communities around puzzles that I don't know about that are doing
Yeah,
that.
I can't think of any community that would it would be difficult for a community to hold together without at least one thing that they care about, like truly care about. And maybe that's the invitation is every community is really an invitation to care about something.
Absolutely. And how would we inject that, or not inject, I don't like that word inject, but why does that feel like not what's happening on big issues, the kind that are affecting all of us in the world? I know that's too big a question for anyone, but if it's
Well, I think
so,
that that's
you know,
part of it. It's too big, and so the the pieces the pieces of those are just too big. We can't possibly grip them. It's that coordinated action, um, right? The tragedy of the commons aspect. And so I think when we see these big problems, we just naturally think, oh well, that's someone else's problem. That's too big for me to handle. It would require effort to find other people to lift this heavy object off the ground. It would require more expertise than I have. It requires more care than I have. And then you get into these self-defeating, I think, nihilistic patterns.
that reminds me a lot of what you said about, and what I said about when you first opened one of your puzzles and how some people are just overwhelmed by it. So you kind of gave a way to deal with that, I guess, like was curiosity. And how would that maybe translate, or what do you think with these other big problems? How might we look at them a little bit differently through a puzzling lens and find some two pieces that interest us that we could then kind of fractally go into? Or does that make any sense at all? Like, would you have any advice for someone who sees your puzzle and is overwhelmed, for example? Because it seems like that same advice might have something helpful in it for the way we're overwhelmed with these big problems.
Yeah, I think this ties fairly well with a poem by David White, "Start Closer In."
Oh, wow.
Right. So I think that comes back to that sense of home in the self. No matter where you are, wherever you've traveled, you do have that sense of big S self that you can find within. And so even when the context is this big world problem, you are in the world, and so you can always start closer in. So how is the world inviting you personally to care about this, and what small piece, what small action can you move towards, that's closer to you than the big world, scary world out there? What can you do to just inch towards care in either your personal life or the small group of people that you happen to call a family, or the small group of friends that makes up a community? There's always something closer in that can be done if big the big step can't be done by you alone. Back to
Yeah.
that base camp aspect, you can always, worst case, you can always clean up the base camp.
So build base camps together. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
That reminds me of what people are doing, actually, in Minneapolis, for example, or other places where people are just. It reminds me of something Douglas Rushkoff said too, about just what's around you right now that you care about. Start there. You know,
Yeah.
who's around you. What do you care about? Even if it's bread clips or whatever, but maybe it's also something else very immediate, and puzzle with that. And actually, it has these huge repercussions, actually, because everything's connected to everything. So I think that's a beautiful idea, and also a beautiful idea to hold with just opening a puzzle and making sense with it, and how those can help each other, those different environments. So thanks for making these. I guess before we go, I haven't brought up the word love, but I for some reason want to ask more about home and what you think of as home, because in care and this kind of thing, since this transformation where you became a puzzle maker and you're doing this. I mean, I feel so much care in the way that you approach it, even the way you and I met, and the way that you sent the puzzle, and your patience, and there's a lot of care in that. And does that does that feel more like a home or a base camp to you? That sort of what is that activity of living, or does that make any sense at all? What do all these words bring up, I guess, for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought of that, but I guess I feel fairly rooted, I guess would be the right word, grounded in this way of life, of this philosophy of life where care is important. And so if I can anchor myself in care, generally good things follow. Certainly if I'm in an environment where I feel cared, where I'm experiencing care from others, that certainly feels like home. And so the more I can make that feeling resonate in me and around me, I think that that sense of home can grow, and ultimately that's a place where love can flourish. So yeah, I that's where I want to be. I'm assuming that most people want to be in that place of belonging too. Um, it's not always easy, but it's what I keep reminding myself to lean into.
Yeah, there's that tension, but as we talked about, it's also generative, this tension. But has it helped you, all of this, in any way to let yourself be cared for more too? Because sometimes that's a hard thing for me with playing games, is seeing, like, letting other people see I'm vulnerable. For example, everyone always wants to play Scrabble or something, and I'm a terrible speller. But because I've written books and I'm a writer, I'm supposed to be good speller. So I just wonder if any of this has helped you, or if you see it as being able to also help us let ourselves be cared for and loved.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm there yet. Yeah. And it might just be kind of phase of life, right? So I've got a 20-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old son, soon to be 19. So I'm in the caring for mode more so. Um, I having entered into spaces where I'm cared for, that is it's um that itself is a bit uncomfortable, I think, because it's I'm the flow typically goes in the opposite direction, and so that's
Mm.
one of the destabilizing environments I am trying to put myself in. But it's yeah, that vulnerability piece is challenging.
Yeah, for all of us. Thanks for just being honest about it. I think
Yeah.
especially when you have kids at all, but when they're that age, and especially right now with all the puzzles that we have, you do feel like you have to keep things in control or be the one helping and taking care and holding space. But I'll just remind you of what you told me or us earlier about that constellation, or thinking of it as a star, and not a polarity. And yeah, maybe playing with that a little bit, of letting yourself be cared for too from places that you might not expect, right? Not necessarily that space that's opposite you. Because I just bring it up because I want to, before we go, I want to tell you that I appreciate the care that you give. You read people's work and you share people's work and you notice ideas. And I think that's a kind of care. Also, do you know the puzzles, of course, and all that we've talked about. But I just wanted to say I appreciate it. Thanks for, sharing it with me.
Yeah, and likewise, one of the aspects I'm exploring is being a little bit more vulnerable. I sensed, I would say accurately, that you would hold me in care in this vulnerable state of sharing my thoughts. That it's not something I do in recorded fashion very often, but I knew this would be a space uh, with a lot of love and care. So that certainly helps being playful.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Also, it gives something that a lot of people need, because you're talking in an honest way, and it really means a lot, I think, to a lot of people. So thanks. Let's stay in contact,
That'd be great.
and I look forward to, more puzzles, and actually, learning from you. I really enjoy your writing too. So it's all about care. So is there any thing you want to say before we go, or anything like you want to be sure that I share with everyone in terms of where to find you, how to buy your puzzles? I know I can already find all the links and put that stuff on, but
Yeah, probably the best places to find me and what we do would be the StumpCraft website, so stumpcraft.com, and then I'm being more vulnerable and more open on the writing side on Substack. So that's releasing the muse on Substack.
And on his Substack, everyone, there's some cool practices for holding paradox. You always ask me for those, so go to his website and check him out. And he's actually found other people who are doing interesting things too that he links to in his articles. So look at the links in the show notes and go there. All right, Jason, have a beautiful day there exploring and doing what you do in writing.
Great.
And I'll talk to you
enjoy
soon.
the evening, the last few hours of daylight.
Yes, well, actually, the daylight is
magic hour.
gone. Jason mentioned a poem when we were talking, so I thought I have to at least read a little bit of it. It's called Start Close In by David White. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing. Close in, the step you don't want to take. Start with the ground you know, the pale ground beneath your feet, your own way to begin the conversation. Start with your own question. Give up on other people's questions. Don't let them smother something simple. To hear another's voice, follow your own voice. Wait until that voice becomes an intimate, private ear that can really listen to another. Start right now. Take a small step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused. Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing close in, the step you don't want to take. That's actually a perfect poem for this friction-friendly idea that I've been talking about. So once again, Jason introduces me to something lovely at just the right time. All right, everybody, be well.